We're on. Welcome to the third Alt VR live stream ever. This is the first VR and philosophy live stream, though. The first live stream with a plan, perhaps, for what to discuss. So, as some of you may know, we have been covering. Oops, I have sound myself here. We have been covering some VR philosophy, mainly through interviews in virtual reality with various interesting people, and I can also announce that we will soon be having an interview with Kent Bai, the VR philosopher, podcast guy himself, a host of Voices of VR, one of the greatest resources ever, really, for the anything virtual reality art, culture, business, and ethics, not least. So I hope that you look forward to that. But yeah, for this stream, the idea is basically that I'll discuss some philosophical questions regarding virtual reality, and you can ask questions in the chat if you would like me to discuss anything in particular. You can take questions, make it go back and forth. I already announced this at the Twitter and also the YouTube social media thing before, as well as on the Discord. If you'd like to have an invite to the Discord, I can paste that, because that you can also ask questions there and join the other ones who are into the kind of topics that we discuss here on this channel. Twitter and also the YouTube social media thing before, as well as on the Discord. If you'd like to have an invite to the Discord, I can paste that, because okay, thanks, Brett. Questions there, and second delay. Ones who are into the kind of topics that we discuss here on this channel. I wonder where that come from. I'll see if I can fix it. But yeah, I have some questions from. Oh no, I can see where it comes from, actually, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, maybe it's gone now. I hope so. Please say if it's not. I've already gathered some questions that I'm going to be discussing, and I can read the first one so that we'll just get the conversation going. It's a weird delay echo. It's good now? Okay, good. All right. Let's see here. All right. Since Brett is here, it would be interesting to mention some of his questions. So, Brett asked, or said, 2035 full conversations with your AI life companions and biometric procedurally generated VR worlds. Will most people choose to work at building relationships with the people and places in the real life, or will they shift more towards tailoring their own comfort bubble in virtual worlds? There's some other questions below there. I'll start with this. That's a really interesting question. I mean, I wonder what it would be like to have the sort of free-flowing conversation where you don't notice any sort of stop. I mean, if you try any chat bot on a web page or an AI like that, or even just talking to Siri or Alexa, you always sort of meet the point at which you can't speak freely. You always adapt to the system. When we get past that, where you really can speak to them like you're speaking to another person, then I think it will get really creepy, because we already know that we can gain I mean, like human emotions, we project human emotions into things already. You can almost just, if you look at a tree in a forest, that seems a little bit sentient, and that's sort of enough to project life and meaning into it. So I think that no matter how much we know that things don't have an inside life, that there's nobody home, I think that it will become a big problem simply because we can't turn off reading other minds into the things that have those other minds. So to sort of avoid the pessimism around that, I think that AI friends may actually be something positive in a sense. I mean, in a way, if we can relate to it like speaking to ourselves, think of it as that you have this friend that's mapped to your interests and that you're speaking to yourself. But yeah, it's always freaky. It's like you have to try not to just be romantic and enjoy things that the way they are now, because all the possibilities that are in, I mean, it's just like reading information. We have virtual characters in books that we get a really nice impression of, right? And you sort of develop relationships with characters in books that are totally fictional. Why can't you? It will just be a new form of art to have these AI friends, and it will be, yeah, having companions like that will be pieces of art to a certain, yeah. Clay, that's a good point. Her, I haven't seen that movie yet. I've heard about it. I was planning to see it for a long time, but that seems to really take up exactly that kind of question. But I mean, when I first heard those kind of questions, it's always a bit pessimistic and dark. But I think that these things will become art forms, and like regular art, like books, it can be probably terrifying to read and to interact with it. But to move on in the question, will then most people choose to work hard at building relationships with people and places in real life, or will they shift towards tailoring their own comfort bubble? I think that if you can design a friend, or if you can control, say that in regular social life you have to be nice to people for them to be nice to you. If we let sort of this moral system degenerate in VR, and that no matter how you treat this person, they will always be nice to you, I don't think that's going to be something that we want either way. And maybe it can even be a way for us to rediscover why we actually like things we do. Like, I mean, you already have the same kind of problem with plastic sex dolls or whatever, porn even, that you don't want something that's dead. You don't want something that always is confirming to your will. You want something that's alive, that can surprise you. But of course, maybe that can also be simulated, right? And then we get back to the AI friend art thing again. But I think that in everything, in terms of this, getting everything you like, the comfort bubble thing, it depends, of course, on what kind of virtual reality technology that you're talking about. But if we still, to a certain extent, remain ourselves, then we need challenges. And I think that will become more and more obvious, because the more, if you only get the happiness, then or if you only get the pleasure, I mean, it eventually becomes pain. So probably I can imagine that there will be these AI people that will become really hard to get, so that you can probably maybe even purchase a ticket to get this virtual reality girlfriend that you basically have no chance of getting, and there will be a gamifying element to it. Doesn't really sound much better, but I think that challenge is probably the most valuable thing we have in terms of defining meaning, because if you can only get things, then you sort of know out everything to that point. You just yeah, at a certain point if you are used to getting pleasure 100%, then that becomes the new normal, and challenge and suffering is a great way to alleviate that point. All right, there's another question also here from Brett. Will AI VR be integrated into daily life as a helpful leveraging tool? Or will it bring upon a fracturing of society where many groups of perhaps about 100 people each will break off to live in their own self-sustaining communities outside of major cities? I actually really like that idea. I don't necessarily think that we need to have mass culture. I haven't thought about it a lot, but I enjoy that people can, have these small tribes and maybe really try to experiment with radically new ways of living, of having culture. You don't need to make, say, in metaverse kind of thing, or even just in the VR chat of 2035, that, all right, you don't have to win an election or whatever to have certain policies. You can, all right, this is where we are living, this is the way we do things in VR, and you can try new ways of being together. That seems really interesting, at least. I'm sure people will make a lot of mistakes, but it sounds like an interesting idea. I wonder what you think of this as well. Self-sustaining communities outside of major cities sounds interesting. Getting some cyberpunk vibes for the what do they call them? Yeah, the nomads. It seems like a cool life. But yeah, I think that experimentation, there will be a lot of experimentation, and probably eventually we'll find out that we're quite boring, and with that we maybe didn't want things to be that much different. To those who are new in the chat or watching here, we're just doing a VR philosophy Q&A. I've gathered up some questions, and we'll just take them turn after turn. So if you have anything, you can post them in the chat. And also, I've added the Discord link in the chat if anyone is interested in checking out the Discord and hanging out there, where this will sort of go on even after the live stream. So I also shared this on Twitter, and I got an answer from Usalt, who asked, where are you when you are in VR? And that is sort of asking for a certain discipline to answer that question from a certain perspective. So I think that if you are sort of strictly speaking, like taking your position from like the scientific logical positivism, where is the consciousness, then you would of course say that, well, you are in whatever room that you entered in the VR gear, right? You could be explained, your position could be explained with a certain geometrical coordinates, how your position in relation to the sun that sustains you, and so on and so on. Where it gets more interesting is if you take your approach to be the experiential one, or what is it that determines that you are anywhere? Is it not, if you think about it, every life, or there is no actually existing or being anywhere apart from our experience of being there, right? Of course, someone else would have the experience of me being in the same room where I am when I put on the VR headset. And in this way, you could sort of explain that perhaps those those that you have, or how do you put it? The majority wins, right? If 100 people can observe that you're in that room, then maybe you are in that room. But if we sort of look closer at how we actually identify with our bodies and our surroundings in the world, then we are in the VR, and that is sort of projecting, or we are projecting who we are into the virtual reality simulation. So when you put on an avatar, then you put on that avatar. And so yeah, it's a weird question. Of course, you can never totally escape into the virtual reality simulation. You will always need the floor to stand on. You will always be partially present there. But in the same way as where are you when you're dreaming? I mean, you're in your mind, right? You're always in your mind. Your mind is always projecting things outward. And according to the phenomenologists like Merleau-Ponty, for us to be somewhere, or even for us to go somewhere, we must already be there. I mean, if I now I'm thinking of the bathroom or the kitchen, then he would say that I already have that place in me. That's the only way I can go there, because I have it in my intentions. And it's the same with the virtual. If it is accessible to us, then it's within the horizons of our world, in a certain sense. We have a question in the chat here too. I think Pablo is at least saying it's interesting, the desire to recreate reality in VR when VR is none of the limitations of reality. Yeah, that's a good point. I think I'm also a bit guilty there. I mean, I've recreated this apartment in VR. It didn't really do anything special for me. I guess it's also to be able to have the mixed reality thing. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's a good question. Why are we so obsessed with reality, or this way of simply having things? How can't we be able to really think outside the box? What would it mean for us even to think outside the box in that way? I think that it's like in the same way that we can't picture in our minds that there has never been anything before. I mean, we can't picture emptiness, and we can't picture eternity. The only thing that we can sort of picture is the in-betweens, the change, and incidentally, it's the only thing that we have not experienced. We haven't experienced eternity nor nothingness, because both are impossible. So why can't we tune up our fantasy? How crazy can it really get in VR? It's like, it seems that our only way of novelty or novel seeing is like the combination of two things. Like if you have a flying lion, it's because you've seen a bird and you've seen a lion, and you think that the lion can. So how do we tap into that radical creativity? So Pablo is writing like scripture accurate depictions of deities. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You have those crazy Hindu gods, right? For instance, with 1,000 heads or whatever. And what would it be like to embody those things? I mean, Jaron Lanier did some really interesting experiments back in the day in like embodying lobsters or octopi or whatever, and controlling more limbs. It would really be interesting to try to have awe-inspiring experiences like that, of really meeting something great. I mean, I want a dragon game in VR in some way. Locations that no longer exist or couldn't exist. Yeah, it would be great to also be able to visit the world, or I mean just the earth, back throughout the years, and having this sort of time machine. So Brett is writing that I was referring to Internet of Things. AI takes over a large portion of the job market. Biometric mass camera surveillance requires societies that it may become a reality. Yeah, it kind of freaks me out thinking about like the mass surveillance stuff, and trying to stay off the grid certainly seems like a good idea. So Pablo, what you can Google, his term is called homuncular flexibility. Let's see if I can write that for you. Yeah, alright, I've sent a link here to a paper of it. Homuncular flexibility was a term sort of defined by Jaron Lanier. But it appears that this is some new research that people's done on it. Jon Olsen, have you read the book Risk and Work Simulation Hypothesis? No, I haven't. But I did participate in a conference where I think he was. I can't really remember, but I think I know what it's like, the gist of it at least. I know that he was working at MIT or something, and wrote this book. But it would be interesting to talk about simulation, because I like it, even as a theory of whatever, how things work, or so on, because to me it's like the kind of it's a super intuitive idea of how the world works, and it's sort of had a resurgence now because of virtual reality technologies and artificial intelligence. These two really interesting technologies that's been developed the last 50 years or something like that, and they're coming together. But the story of simulation is, I mean, it's so much older. It's like the oldest idea almost that we have. Not in the idea of sort of God the Father, the Christian God designing the world, because that's not simulation. That's like that just means that the structure of the world is that it's created, but it's not meant to be sort of destroyed again. Or simulation implies that it's not necessarily the real state of the world, but the biblical God creation myth is that this is the real deal. But the Hindu creation myth, right? So I enjoy this, best pitched by Alan Watts, who sort of calls this a very logical idea, because what would you do if you were God? So if we sort of first imagine God, what would he do? If you're just sitting around and you're this omnipresent, omnipotent God, and you can do whatever you like, then that may be fun for a few 100 million years. You really go out of your mind and just have a lot of ball and fun, but eventually you find out that there is something that you can't give yourself because you're God, and that would be a surprise, because when you are one, this one perfect being, then you're so perfect that you really can't surprise or scare yourself. So you split, and that's where you have the first duality. You have man and human beings, for instance, or you have basically anything that's detached from the original source in a simulation. But you can't really split yourself, but you can fool yourself into splitting. You can surprise yourself. And I think that's a very logical idea. I think it's an entertaining idea. I think it makes sense. All sort of statements about the true state of reality, I think, is impossible and not really. It's never worth it to cling to any ideas. But that simulation makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Absolutely. It's also approachable from how would you say, a more logical way of reasoning. With the Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis, you could sort of yeah, how does it run? There's like three different alternatives. If the way of virtual reality technology or just general simulation and computing power technologies that we already have today, if they keep on developing, then at a certain point, it will be indistinguishable from everyday experience. Now, there are a couple of reasons why that may not happen. One is that civilization ends. The other is that we would not be the kind of people to do that thing, that it just wouldn't be a desirable end goal in itself. Now, that we wouldn't be able, or that we wouldn't want to do it, doesn't seem likely. Human beings are definitely the kind of people that would want to do this, which I suppose we are a testament to right now. That civilization ends, maybe, but it may already have happened. That's also sort of this third alternative, that once the possibility of this ever happening within the logical systems that we use and operate, then the likelihood for this already having happened is quite large. Because if there even is a really small percentage, once that happens, then time ceases to mean something, reality ceases to mean something, and you could be one out of billions simulated worlds. So it's an interesting question, taken from we may of course be the one world that, or in the beginning then it was one originary world, but the likelihood of we being that world, if we ever get to a point where it's inevitable that we will do these simulating experiences, then it's perhaps not that likely that we are the first originary world. So Yun is writing again, we may reach a point in technological advancement where we are able to simulate, where we are capable to simulate reality, and we will do it in order to save resources and extend our biological lifetime. Yeah. I never thought about that. So I've heard like the creepy thought that maybe we haven't discovered aliens because it's a bad idea to let people know where we are in the universe, but it would be interesting if they're all living in simulations, because that's simply a safe way to go. That is a really interesting idea. Than to face pandemic and lack of resources. Yeah, I guess if you can just tug into like a 2,000 liter smoothie machine and just get fed, and then that's a better way to go. I think that these things always sound so creepy because you have to actually visualize where the body is actually at. But I think that these are the kind of things that is probably necessary to develop if people are going to go to other planets, to have this, if you're going, fasting your eyes, your experience, if everything, you're going to travel to this other planet for say 400 years, then you can't just go to sleep for 400 years. You would need some sort of cognitive stimulation perhaps, and the virtual worlds then would be fascinating. But I wonder why it's so. I think a point is, okay, if we fear sort of plugging into the matrix or these virtual worlds, then a question is what is so fearful about that? And I think what it's arising in me is that we are afraid of gambling, of sort of letting the opportunity go to see if there is something more to. If you're deciding that, okay, I'm going to map into this kind of virtual environment for say 100 years or until I die, then you've sort of decided. That's like committing. That's like committing to your religion or something like that. So you can never take it back. And there is something creepy about that. What if the answer is in the real world in some sort of way, and you've abandoned it for the virtual, especially if the virtual reality is more pleasing. So there is that thought experiment, by the way, which asks exactly that. It's meant to test the idea of hedonism, and that if you would be able to plug into a machine that would keep you happy for the rest of your days, just give you ultimate pleasure. And you may answer yes, I would definitely love to do that, or you may answer no. And most people tend to answer no because of what I just explained, that we feel that there is something more, or that we'll suffer a bit more because then it's real or whatever. So it may be then thought that that question is able to explain that we humans do not settle for hedonism, that in some way we are better than that, and we crave authenticity or this way of living. But a really good critique of that question was to flip the question around. What if you found out now that you're living in the pleasure machine? What if you figured out now that this is the best you got? Would you then care enough for authenticity to wake up from that? And that sort of illuminates that maybe what you really like is more what you're familiar with instead of authenticity. And I think that's a good point. We think that, oh yeah, I might fear going into whatever hypothetical virtual scenario not because I'm so incredibly ethical or authentic in my human beingness, but simply because this is what we're used to, and human beings like what they're used to. It's a nice thought to think that, oh yeah, authenticity, that is the way to go. It's really important for me to live an authentic life, and maybe it is, but I'm not sure if I can justify it or believe my own answers to the question. Because if you figured out right now that you're living in an illusion and that things are way harder than it seems, then we're not always ready for that. Of course you can do something crazy like smoking DMT or whatever, and you'll surely feel that whatever you have experienced up to that moment was a hallucination or whatever, and wake up to the real thing. But taking the choice to live there apart from your illusions that you've been used to for so many years, I think is a really hard choice. All right, Brett has a question again. If this is a simulation, why this chose error? Why simulate suffering without purpose? That is, we have parasites that's life cycle is purely to burrow persons' eye, blinding them, sometimes children. Yeah, I mean, the problem of evil is not something to just dismiss, and I won't just dismiss it because we're living it. There is no excuse, there is no words that can in some way put an end to or justify suffering. It wouldn't be suffering if we had words that could make it not come true. But having said that, there are thoughts that at least make it seem why suffering has a role to serve, at least. And again, I think I'm returning to Alan Watts, but the whole reason why we now, we're sitting here. I'm having a good time. I have this lazy casual Sunday. Been working a lot for the last months, really, with my work, doing my PhD. I finally got some time off. It's really nice to sit here. But my enjoying sitting here is to a large degree determined by how much stress I've had the last 2 months. Tomorrow I don't really have any plans. It feels good. And so my suffering is what enables the contrast of the happiness. Of course, that is a very mild example. It's not the bacteria making my blindness, but I think there is something to it that our whole life is set against the backdrop of death. And in Hinduism you have these sects even worshipping Kali, like the supreme mother of darkness, like the awfuls, the most terrible thing that you can ever imagine, because it gives manure to life. That everything is changing all the time, that everything has the possibility to fall apart is, it doesn't justify evil, but if you are operating within this simulation approach of viewing the world, then all evil would be something that the self is doing towards itself. That is at least the way it's understood within the Hindu mythology, that there is no one to whom the evil can strike except for the self, because all is the self playing hide and seek with itself. And when it plays hide, it goes into the darkness, it moves away from itself and is suffering and has the thrilling joy of experiencing itself. But it's very important to note that this kind of metaphysics has very little to do with ethics or any. It's not like any person thinking in terms of this kind of metaphysics would mean that evil is righteousness, that evil is necessary, that we should strive to keep up the evil in any way. It just serves to designate the role that if everything was loving, if everything was positive, if everything was not suffering, then we wouldn't know what it was, because things are defined in contrasts. And day is glorious because we had a night, and relaxation is nice because we have been stressed. And if we were to be eternal beings just living in eternity forever and ever, always having a blast, then I think we would get bored. And I think that is why this idea makes sense, that eventually, if you know that everything is alright anyway, then why wouldn't you enter into a nightmare just to have the thrilling experience of waking up from it? It's not meant to justify evil in any way, because no matter how fun that is as an idea, the next time I'm having a panic attack, then I'm not going to enjoy that idea very much, because I can't see it as a game. And that is, if anything, perhaps the most widely involved you can be in the game. Yeah, okay, so Hellspawn, or ruler of hell, is saying that the problem of evil doesn't really apply to a simulation. And I agree, to a certain extent. Evil would then be defined within the bounds of the simulation. And if you are standing outside of the simulation, contemplating the simulation, then evil could not have a meaning of being absolute. It would always be relative within the simulation itself. And that makes sense. So evil from the standpoint of the absolute self, when he has woken up from his dream, would definitely be meaningless. I find it strange that within the millions of years time frame, we live in the exact point of time to see the rise of computer science. Yeah, I mean, it's not like anything is arbitrary, right? We are where we are. But when we abstract the notion that we can see back into time and just the last 100 years we've had technology, and so many options are opening up now for things to create, way of beings to realize. I think that we are in a super interesting time, for sure. Like, I mean, just 150 years ago, having a comfortable life was really hard, at least in terms of the kind of things that we define as comfort, right? But we human beings also have a tendency to ignore constants. So I don't necessarily think that we live better lives now. We have easier lives in terms of physical suffering, of hunger, and all that, and comfort. At least most of us, right? There are many people that are still suffering today, but the percentage of human beings who now can eat and drink and feel relatively safe, it's never been higher, and it's increasing every day. But we have a tendency to ignore constants and find other problems. Like I recently invested in some crypto that went to shit quite fast. And we have this tendency to find problems. Like if you've delivered an assignment, if you I just had some academic papers accepted, feels really good. But for a moment, those were the only problems in my mind. I had to get this thing done, and you always imagine this thing. If this would be fixed for me, then I would relax. Then everything would be fine. But once that you get that experience, a couple of weeks go by, and you're like, what should I worry about now? We have a tendency to define all our problems and go into them, and defining our new low and high points, our worst fears and our new desires, and we always seem to be in the middle. We never really get to the extremely high feeling, and we sometimes feel like we go to the absolute low. But for us, there is usually that I'm relatively comfortable in my home now is defined in relation to the backdrop that something absolutely terrible might happen, that my friends could be killed, or that someone might break into my house, that I may lose everything. And against the high point, I might win the lottery, my YouTube channel might do really well, or whatever. We always have these worst fears and our highest hope, and we always seem to be in the middle of it. So, and I think that that also speaks for the simulation in a certain way, because what do we want? We want a game, right? It's like the optimal game theory. You would like, if you're playing chess against someone, then you never want a competitor that you can always beat, because then things are too easy. But you never want to lose all the time either, because that's also a bad game. You want a competitor that you can sometimes win against, sometimes lose against, and the life is in a certain way quite like that. We always seem to have something that can make our life worse. We always have something that can make our life better, and that's quite a good game theory for keeping things going. But the point is also that if we ever got to the point where we realized that it's all a game, that it's all a simulation, then that would sort of clear the simulation, it would fix it, and we would win in our realization that it's a simulation, and that would be like finishing the game. And if you've ever finished a game, then you realize that that's not very fun either. If you've just finished playing The Witcher 3 and you watch the ending, that's beautiful, but then you're without a game. So I think that there is something in us, and that would be what is referred to as karma in Hinduism, or our doing, our involvement, our fundamental involvement with the world, being absorbed with care for the world. And that's what keeps the game going. The karma is the constant involvement and the playing of the game that is so fundamental to us and which keeps things lively. Sounds like you're also describing the characteristics that create a sense of flow. Yeah, I think, being able to be involved is definitely what can keep our sense of, but please elaborate. What can create our sense of flow, of being involved. We have something that we want. We always have something that we want, which keeps us totally involved. If we didn't have that involvement, it is possible to see the idea of being indifferentiated towards the world. That is perhaps what is meant by enlightenment to a certain sense, right? If you don't have any, wishes, if you're given up on desire, then in some of these disciplines, people equate enlightenment or nirvana by the quenching or the blowing up of desire, blowing up the torch of desire. And this fundamental involvement it does certainly keep the world interesting. Alright, I'll be right back, guys. I just need to use the toilet. But just keep the chat going if you still have some questions. Be right back. Brett, challenge level that is just one step beyond your current skill level. That's a good point. So that is very related to game theory and everything that goes on like that. You never, it's like what you want in a job, right? You want to be comfortable enough to not constantly be in some sort of existential despair or wondering if can you ever do this job. You always want enough challenge that can keep you going, keep things interested, but nevertheless maintain this sense of comfort or whatever. It's a really interesting theory to think of flow and game theory as it's realized in just our everyday life like that. That's a really good point. Okay, I think I have had a question also from someone at our Discord. I'll just paste that link again, by the way, because I saw some new faces. Also, Rob Dernab has joined the Discord. I've been very, very bad at promoting this Discord. I actually created it as a part of the first 1,000 subscribers we had at this channel last year, but I'll try to promote it a bit more. Hopefully I can create some more content now too. I have some very interesting things planned. For instance, I have this EEG, like this mind reader thing that you can plug into your VR headset. I want to create a mind-controlled mind palace there, which can be fun. So this is a place to just give ideas and just talk, and I'm there all the time. Okay, we have another question from Brett. Which of your fundamental sense would you like to swap or remap? I mean, creating a new sense would be interesting. I sometimes love to discuss and consider the idea of, like, if you were blind, having certainly, or if you were surprisingly were to introduce vision into your mind, would you like that? And I think for most people it's the familiarity that we're after, and it would suck to lose our vision, we who have it. But for someone that's been deaf their entire life, it would probably be terrifying to even alter that sense in any way. I mean, there are some funny stories. I read it the other day where people who are blind and they have some people come visiting them, and they're like, could I turn on the lights? Because those who are blind, they of course don't really have any reason to have on lamps in their house. And it's such an interesting question, because from the deaf people's point of view, the blind people's point of view, it's like, what, can't they function without this light thing? And that's their world, right? It's all they've ever known. And if we were to introduce something new, what would it be? I mean, we already have mediations of our senses, right? We can now reach other distances. We can gain overviews of technological representations of reality. So which of my fundamental senses would like to swap or remap? I think what would be really interesting, and of course none of these things are imaginable really, are they? But there is a sense in which we can't actually see 3 dimensions. If you come to think about it, it's all an approximation, right? We have our 2 eyes, and through them we are sort of abstracting or calculating how far things are away from ourselves, but that's all an illusion, which is even why it can be represented through VR technologies. But actually seeing or experiencing 3 dimensions would be super interesting. But I don't know how to explain that. But if you could actually see into the 3 dimensions and inhabit them, instead of it being just from your point. Perhaps, okay, I think I know what I want. I would like a larger field of view than 210 degrees or whatever we have in real life. I would like the experience of being able to see in 360 degrees simultaneously. Impossible to imagine. But also, if I can see 210 degrees, why can't I go full 360? Of course, it's dependent on the way that we even work in our the way we exist. But if that was possible, then that would be certainly an interesting experience, because it's just so impossible to even imagine. But that would certainly be interesting. But also, like you were mentioning, echolocation, it would be cool to just experience. I mean, you have Thomas Nagel's famous essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" Right? Which echolocation, for instance, is hinting towards. And the whole "what is it like" thing, because we certainly have there's a certain quality to our experience that we feel can't be reduced to the sort of sensory impressions or just mere stimuli. There is a certain quality to our existence and being, and I think that's yeah, there is something to that. I mean, what's it like to be my cat, for instance, which incidentally is deaf. I have no idea how he even knows how to meow, because he's never heard anything, so that's apparently something that is in his genes. But being able to be different creatures, having the experience of what it's like to perhaps not be human, to not always have this commentary going on our lives, always being this reflecting, philosophizing human, which if we haven't experienced, then we think about that experience, or we say a sentence and we're like, oh, I just said that sentence, and I'm saying sentences about the sentence, and my notion of me, which is just an idea, is sort of being attributed as the owner of another idea. And sometimes you get into also a flow state where you're not making up these narratives about yourself. And I think being a cat or whatever would be a really interesting VR experience if you could have, like you're saying, Brett, invasive BCI. And I suppose by invasive you mean that you could, it's a BCI that could not just read but also write to your neurons. That would certainly be interesting. I'll introduce you to my cat, by the way. He's an active part of this household. Being this fellow, that would certainly be an interesting VR experience. Say hi, Lucius. Perhaps the brain could learn to read the patterns of a fourth or fifth dimension. Yeah, who knows, right? I think the closest to that would be the homuncular flexibility thing that we just discussed, because I haven't tried it. I need to try it. I just got some Vive trackers, and I think then you could try to introduce some other limbs, because at least the bodily space is very flexible. So you may have all heard of the rubber hand illusion and virtual embodiments, but the rubber hand illusion is one of the most fascinating aspects that really displays how humans are utilizing their bodily schema. And the experiment, which isn't that old even, I think it's like from the 90s, worked that you have your hands on a table like this, but instead of say this hand is cloaked, so you can't see it, and instead approximately where your hand would be, you see a rubber hand instead, and someone is rubbing both your physical hand and the rubber hand simultaneously, but you can only see the rubber hand. So you're having a feeling of someone stroking your hand, but you attribute that feeling to the rubber hand, and you're incorporating that hand into your bodily schema. And that is also how virtual embodiment in VR is working, right? When you are, say that you're wearing full body tracking gear and someone is stimulating you, then you're really identifying as if that is your body. And what is the extent to which this embodiment works? We also know it from examples such as in Maurice Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception. The blind man sort of embodies the cane, right? And he doesn't experience that cane as something in the objective world outside of him. It's that through which he experiences the regular world. So I think that what is the limit? What is the most we can embody? How different can we become through virtual embodiments? With additional limbs, what if we could embody worlds? I mean, as a Hellspawn ruler, or no, who was that? Let's see. Yeah, Pablo. Like, why do we always just imagine things that we already have in reality? How could we get to this radical creativity where we really could try to embody things that we can't even conceive? How different could our experiences be by adopting things into our bodily schema and acting through them? I think that's really interesting. So Brett is the 360 camera expert here. Yeah, I get your point. I think that you could definitely, if you viewed everything through 360 degrees as framed, that you're basically seeing an equirectangular version of the world, then I think that you could adapt just in the same way as people have been using these glasses that make them see everything upside down, and then they adapt. And when they take those glasses off, they can't really. It feels like when you see the world the regular way around, that also needs adaptation. So I think you could do that, but it's hard to imagine that the field of view continues that way and that you could see it all in the same way that you see your 210 degrees now, because you're so used to it being black or nothing behind your head. So seeing all the 360 degrees not in front of you, in the same way that this is not in front of me, but I can still see it. But that it keeps going around. That's what I'm thinking of. That's really hard to imagine. But yeah, seeing 360 degrees, that could even be an experiment. Trying to constantly wear like one of these small 360 degree cameras and trying to live like that with a live stream. That would just be creepy. You could also imagine trying to live your... No, that would just be impractical. If you only saw the back of your head all the time. If you had one of these stereo cameras, like I have a SED Mini, like two eyes, if I just mounted them at the back of my head and just tried to live my life for a week or so, just seeing like that, that would of course be ridiculous. Because there is of course a reason that we are seeing in front of us. That's where our hands are. I guess they work almost as good that way. Then you can reach your face to eat. Anyways, yeah, alright. People used to play Quake like that. So that you'll always see someone behind you. Yeah, I think that makes sense. It would be really weird trying to live life equirectangularly. It would be insane if that was like, yeah, it's so much more practical. I notice everything. Seems weird. I don't have like a small 360 degree camera. I only have access to like an Insta 360 Pro 2 at work. But that seems like a very, very weird experiment. I also wonder what it would be like to, because everything that is at the bottom of these equirectangular things are kind of being stretched, like the poles. If you view a map, like the Antarctica is always sort of defining the bottom because it's present in all the degrees, so to speak. So everything is magnified at the poles. But certainly worth an experiment. Okay, I have another question from Green Teeness on Discord. it's concerning like the metaverse, or what we could perhaps define as the future combination where we are not yet, in terms of VR, the internet, and social relations and so on. So how far will our civilization extend into the metaverse? Will we have new government and new types of warfare? New policies on the behaviors of the environment, and how are we to interact in such social structures and environment? Yeah, I think that, we were briefly discussing like new policies and behaviors of the environment with the question like, would people break off into smaller subcultures and trying to live off the sort of increasing cyberpunk grid in the cities, and maybe this technology could offer new ways of living, new ways of being together, right? And I think that there is something to be said for that. But I think that, our civilization is already extending into the metaverse. The only thing that VR can do for the metaverse, or not the only thing, but it can make the metaverse maybe appear more as the actual reality that is encompassing us today. Like, for instance, banking, all the information that we have online. If sort of our grid were to be sapped by some solar flare or whatever, then that already means that we're in deep shit. And cyber attacks are huge, right? Which is probably laying behind the question of new types of warfare and governments and so on. But I think that blockchain technology is probably going to become quite huge, because it's really stable. Having it decentralized will become important in terms of those attacks. I don't know if anyone of you in the chat knows a lot about this, but like if virtual worlds could run on the blockchain technologies and so on, that is definitely interesting. I think that the future of the metaverse is to make these virtual abstractions perhaps seem more real, right? Making it possible to try things out, like the experimentation with social cultures. Perhaps where you are, maybe you can choose your government, maybe you can choose your society. It all goes back to like fundamental philosophical questions on politics, right? Like how can like social contracts, for instance. If you're born into a country, then you have a say in determining how that country is by your vote, right? But you can't really change anything, and you can of course maybe move to someone who has a different system, but perhaps social contracts will be something that you enter into more as, okay, you are now 18 years old, to which society do you want to belong? You have been learning about all these different ways. Maybe you can have like a communist place somewhere, you can have a hyper ultra capitalist place somewhere else, and you can test these different ways of being in the virtual worlds, because there is so much more flexibility. You don't rely on the geography. Of course, someone has maybe paid for your virtual reality access to the grid, which you need to pay some taxes for. I don't know how that would work, but I think that it's interesting to think like this, because politics and the social contracts and so on, they are more or less implicitly agreed upon, and it's very hard to break them. I'm not saying that is bad, I'm not necessarily, but freedom would definitely, if you're sort of extending it in that way, be super interesting. Somnium Space, thank you. I knew that there was something like that. I definitely need to check out that. I'm only just learning about blockchain technologies, really. I don't really know what it's all about, but that sounds super interesting. But yeah, I think that it will really change philosophy and like the Locke and Hobbes social contract, and like what is the primary human motivation for entering into social relations with others, if this could be more chosen. Of course, we already have hey Alex VR, we already have societies, right? You can enter into free like clubs on your spare time. You can engage in this, that, and the other. You can choose which organizations to be a member in, and so on. But to a large extent, you are also bound by the politics and the way of being and way of living of whichever country that you're in, and the political system that is manifest there. And perhaps if we're talking under like the ultimate realization of the VR medium, then when there is no discussion any longer of tax for the roads or whatever, if we really can focus on what kind of virtual worlds do we want to build and what community do we want to belong in the virtual worlds, and you can have this myriad of different politics, different ways of arranging resources within VR, it would really be interesting to see the philosophies on social contracts and politics and really experimentation, so that people could actually have a larger say, like this ultra democracy where your vote to a party is your entering into a party and entering into the virtual worlds where you can live together with all who share your the same reality and viewpoint on the world. You will have a lot of cults, of course. Everything will go to hell, and but it will be definitely be interesting to see that more radical freedom, because I'm definitely voting in elections. I'm not an anarchist in any way, but there is a certain sense of helplessness sometimes when your party isn't winning. And I'm not saying that's bad. That is democracy, but there are limits to democracy. It would be interesting to test a more radically free version of it. Yeah, I wonder what kind of weird virtual world we would live in, Alex. But I think I'd check out the between realities, like a future version of a Discord channel, like an actual virtual environment with where all hell is bound loose. So I'll go on to the question here by Green Tinas on Discord. He said, we have nothing here saying you can't instantaneously build a bridge because that's impossible, or there's a traffic system for flight. We can just take off and fly without any equipment. I think that this sort of takes us back to like what can be defined as Bruce Mau's godlike question. Now that we can do anything, what will we do? That is sort of the question there for VR, and I think that you would probably, if it's not that much investment that's needed, if you're really at the point where whatever goes, then you would probably have these relaxation worlds, and you would have these super adventurous worlds where people are and again, it's like, what sort of dynamic between pain and suffering and pleasure and happiness is it that you seek? And we would probably alternate between these various worlds. And who do you want to be? What kind of role would you like to assume? I think, I'm wondering if anyone in social VR here, do you choose an avatar that looks more or less like you? Or are you using this opportunity to become someone else, to become interpreted in in some other way? Because that is an interesting question. There's a certain sense in which when you're given the choice of how to appear, for instance, in normal reality, you don't really have that choice. You can't really choose how to look. I mean, you can choose to wear the VR philosophy T-shirt, or you can choose to wear something else, but you can't really choose your physical form. You can't choose to be like a small anime girl in VR chat, for instance, in real life, but you can in VR chat, and many people are doing that because they've been looking forward to that freedom. And that kind of interesting means of self-representation is quite odd. So what if we get that freedom with not just personal representation, but what if we can control our moods and ways of being and skills in those virtual worlds in combination? Then it's this radical freedom that really sort of asks the question of who we want to be. Yeah, I typically choose an avatar that looks like me. Yeah, I do so too sometimes. I go for that, but right now the VR chat avatar that I'm using, I think it's like this. It's actually a female avatar, I think, but it's quite androgynous or whatever. It looks like it doesn't sound like it's. If you check one of the, I can maybe post a link to the video. So I don't identify as a VR chat transsexual person, but it's I find it interesting that I don't mind that avatar. Let me see if I can find the video. So it's actually from a VR philosophy podcast with an architect in Norway that's called Kai Rieber, and we discussed smart cities and the metaverse there. But that's for instance a kind of avatar that I like. That doesn't, of course, look like me in real life at all, but I feel really comfortable in that avatar, and it's quite weird. There's a link to it anyways. But I think that is interesting because there is a lot of experimentation with how people are looking in those virtual worlds, and I think that's good. But it's also, I mean, I think it can be necessary sometimes to critically reevaluate that, because I mean, self-representation, at the end of the day, you still have to live in your physical body. And if you get used to living in your ideal representation in VR, maybe the contrast can become depressing. And I mean, I actually talked to, in another video, which I'll also promote here, but that was really interesting, Sarah Hashkeys. And she brought up the issue of eating disorders and how, incidentally, I mean, VR, you can always be this small SMOL anime girl in VR chat, and she actually started the interview by being like this motion capture man, which I suppose was the opposite of that, but it can be problematic that these kind of ways of being are too easy to attain, and that you may reframe the way you relate to your normal body through sort of that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting point, Alex. I think people differ there. I don't often identify with my appearance, especially in VR, when I never see myself. In VR chat, they incidentally have all those mirrors fucking everywhere in those virtual worlds. People love standing in front of the mirrors in their avatars. But yeah, I'm not into fashion in real life either. I think that is actually a good point. People really do differ if they're like, this is how I represent myself, this is not how I represent myself, and so on. Like if you, yeah, I'll have to admit I'm somewhat conscious of fashion or whatever, that's definitely something that I care about and use to express myself in some way. So maybe it's easier for me to relate to it. Yeah, digital fashion, other types of skins. I mean, skins in real life with the realization of AR technologies. Did you, by the way, see that Snapchat are releasing like real life augmented reality glasses now? Lenses 3. They're not for sale, but you can apply. You can call yourself an interesting person that can experiment with these things, and you can maybe get it sent. I'll add a link to that. Maybe you, Alex, and Skiva could get a sample and discuss it on the Between Realities podcast. It's worth a try, right? I sent in an application. I think it appears to be quite comparable to the HoloLens, and they also try to make it look like regular glasses, which doesn't really work. But Snapchat lenses 3 AR. Okay, here's at least a news. It looks like sort of went for the Tesla Cybertruck design with hard edges. But yeah, I didn't find the link to Snapchat's own system there, but when they present it, you can just leave your email behind, show the project that you would like to work with it on, and they may send it to you. I originally saw it in a tweet by Lucas Risotto, and he of course will have them sent to him, so we can look forward to that video, because he made the time machine with the Snapchat lenses too, right? I mean, he's going to probably get them sent first of all. So, and by the way, if anyone who's watching, check out Lucas Builds the Future. It's probably the most interesting VR YouTube channel, and I can't understand why he doesn't get more views. I really can't. It's almost like demotivating, because he uses like 3 months to make one YouTube video and it gets too few views. And it's like, okay, if I want to go full time with Alt VR, I could hardly make something as good as that. And is that what you get rewarded? So check out Lucas Builds the Future. He definitely deserves it. He has this crazy, I mean, the first video did well. Let's see, Lucas Builds the Future, where I made a time machine using Snapchat lenses. But his last video is that he's turned his girlfriend into a musical instrument using the HoloLens 2. But yeah, check out the first episode first, actually. I think it's really funny. But he'll definitely get the Snapchat lenses and make an interesting augmented reality project, no doubt about it. Hello, Didi. Toe drill. I'm interested in how virtual worlds and meat space could melt. Meat space, that's an interesting term. Using virtual parts while being partially immersed with augmented reality and dynamics. That would emerge between full divers and partial abstainers. Oh, okay, I like the terminology used of abstainers. Yeah, because eventually you would have to design the systems as working for those who are fully immersed and those who are not ready to take the full dive, like designing for mobile and desktop at the same time. That's an interesting thought. I have no idea. But it seems, I mean, you already get the experience sometimes, right? If someone is on an app that you're not on, or then a certain sense, a certain reality is closed off for you, but available for those other people, and that can be both nice and not nice. Thanks for the idea. I hadn't thought of that. I especially liked abstainers. Yeah. You have that with social media right now, for instance, and there is a world of meaning that you're not partaking in, for instance. Like I'm on Twitter, and there is this social dynamic. There's this worldliness to it which you wouldn't experience if you didn't see it. Okay, so I can use this opportunity to say that actually this whole YouTube channel thing, AltVR, which actually started way before as a VR philosophy blog. So I've been writing philosophy on VR for maybe a couple of years before I even started this YouTube channel, and I suppose I started to make videos because it was quite limited how many people actually read philosophical texts. So I had a text first approach to this whole thing, but now of course I enjoy making videos and taking the more experimental and pragmatic approach. But if anyone wants to check out the blog itself, then you can go to matrice.no. There are quite a lot of philosophical ideas there, which you can explore, comment on, work on, and whatever. We've made some into, actually, that's, when I come to think about it, that's how I got into VR, was through, you may know the Disrupt channel. Oh, holy shit, he's reached 1 million subscribers now. Congratulations to Disrupt. I think he had like 300k a year ago, or was it 150? I can't remember, but he had read one of the pieces at the VR text philosophy blog, and he wanted to use it for a video, and I was like, oh shit, I can make videos. Okay, can't hear me even. I'll try to make the, because there's been quite a lot of feedback on that. Let's see. Yeah, I think I can maybe try to just speak a little bit louder. I think the whole thing with me, wait, maybe this is actually working. I'm not necessarily very experienced with the streaming thing. Hopefully that's a little better. But anyways, when Disrupt sort of came through asking to use the script in a video, I thought like, oh, maybe I should actually use videos to create this. But if anyone wants to check out those videos from sort of back in the day, 1 year ago, then they're quite interesting. It's basically he who made a beautiful video around one of the VR philosophy texts that I wrote, and it was quite fun. So one of them is called "Would You Plug Into the Simulation?" And I'll add that in the description here. And that was sort of an eye-opener that this could be done. But yeah, originally it was a text philosophy blog. It's still interesting, but I have to admit I can't write that much when I'm trying to create the videos. But that was one of the videos. I really enjoyed that. One of them has like this terribly awkward ad in the middle of it. I can't remember which one it is. Of course, for Raid Shadow Legends, that classic awkward ad scenario, but I assume they pay well because they're everywhere. And the other video, let's see. Yeah, the Existentialist's Guide to VR. Here's the other one. This is using sort of the same imagery which I have right now on the YouTube thumbnail, which isn't Disrupts per se. It's just like this stock photo that you can purchase. But anyway, that's just some history in case you're interested. So Until I get some other questions, if you have any in the chat, then please fire them. Then I can maybe talk about some of the plans for this summer here at AltVR. It hasn't been that much action, unfortunately, this year. I think it's been quite not that many videos. I've just been super busy, but I really want to keep this channel going actually, and I've been saving up some time. So I have a couple of things planned. One of them is that some of you may know the VR apartment videos that I made last summer, and also the tutorial. That video was done quite well, and I thought, okay, how do you actually utilize this space? One of the options could be that you could have some mini games there, and that you could invite like your neighbors. So right now I have my virtual apartment, which I'm using at the Oculus Quest, which is basically this space around me, which is perfectly calibrated to the real apartment, and it could, what would you say? Yeah, you could invite someone there right now, because right now it's hard to meet, at least in Norway, with the quarantine restrictions, and you can maybe play some games. So right now I've recreated the apartment in VR again, but I have some ping pong games, or sorry, some beer pong and just some basketball or whatever, so you could have your friend over. But the other idea is that, you know how in Oculus Quest you have your home environment? If you could just replace that with your physical environment around you. And I tried to make it so that you wouldn't have to do everything again in another program except Unity, but this time you actually have to do it in Blender. So right now we're working on recreating my apartment in Blender. But then your virtual environment could just be your home, like the background of the Oculus Quest, so that you can launch apps and actually use the browser. You can sit and use Netflix, whatever, and wherever you're going, you can actually have it. So it will make it more useful. Alex VR is writing, come visit the States, CES January 2022. Okay, that sounds amazing. I was actually supposed to be in California right now. I was supposed to be at an exchange in Santa Cruz, California, for like 4 months, working with the university there, but of course that didn't work out. But Las Vegas, well, that sounds fun. Would definitely be fun. I guess I can at least view your reporting, but I really do want to travel to the States again. I've been wanting that for a long time, and hopefully it becomes easier, and when we're through with the vaccines and whatever. Toad Rail, that's a really interesting question. The balance between automated decision making and free will. You know what? I didn't think of it, but it's like the problem with AI in warfare, right? The people that don't let the AI make the decisions will be the ones to lose, and that's how you get the bots on the loose. So maybe in the future, those who don't let the AI make their decisions in any business space, or maybe even in love and regular life, that they will sort of drift behind. That's a really interesting question. Yeah, because what is autonomy, right? And to what degree would we actually like to? Yeah, I mean, we already have ways of offloading our autonomy today. We decide that sometimes, I mean, like if you're in a group, sometimes you take the lead, sometimes you just relax. Like if I'm traveling with my wife, she always enjoys finding the way to where we're going, which bus we're taking, and whatever. And I enjoy just not taking part of that because I can trust her decision making, and we only need one person to be stressed about those kind of things. And sometimes it's me who's that person within certain tasks, sometimes it's her. So I think that as long as it's your decision to offload your autonomy to certain functions and not, right? It's like memory. We're offloading our memory into our phones. We trust that this is kept there, and so on. But if it's not a conscious decision, if it's like your general being or your general that you offload everything, then I think it's problematic. But we're offloading so many functions to technology. I mean, everything basically. We can go to sleep because we know something is going to wake us up. Our food is kept cold. I mean, all these things which we're avoiding to do ourselves. But yeah, how would it be? I mean, if you're take some classical mistake, like say if you're always making bad decisions in your love life, and you decide that, I mean, it's like some friends or girlfriends or whatever saying that, oh no, you have to manage my love life, you have to answer these messages because I'm always fucking it up. If we could do that to a bot or to an AI, how would it be? And I actually hadn't thought about that question ever before. It's a really interesting question. And I think that most probably depends on different personality types too, but some people would really probably enjoy that, just not having the responsibility. And then again, you can blame it on a bad software update or it being the bad bot that made the decision and not you. You have someone to blame. I think that's why people join religions and cults and so on. It's to offload your existential responsibility for the freedom that you actually do have all the time in defining your own life. The problem is that if it's still your choice, it was the choice to let the computer take over. So I think that there is something in human beings which likes to avoid these uncertainties and just reduce the uncertainty, basically. Take the uncertainty away. Religion does that for you, and doesn't need to be bad. I mean, there's something to the consistency of a viewpoint that follows you, but AI gods, what about that? Will people worship the best AI programs because it helps you succeed in business and love? Who knows? Maybe you will get like a new kind of Jehovah Witnesses or whatever who claims that no, we found this biochip. It was engraved in gold and it came down from the heavens. And if you just install this, everything will be fine. I think I enjoyed that idea. That would make an interesting book. There's probably some science fiction books already about that, right? AI gods, computer program from another dimension or planet that just was found somewhere, and if you install it on your chip, it would help you make the best choices and become the best person. And you have these devoted AI cults all worshipping the golden chip. Who knows, right? Brett, how do you avoid any chance of drift in your tracking when you try to walk around? It's been a really long time since I actually tested the virtual environment, but what I recall is that it just became better and better, and I don't know how that tracking works, but I mean, originally you just have the calibration spot, right? But yeah, it just seemed to be good enough for me. And it's not like I tried to touch everything all the time, but drifting, I didn't find that to actually be the case with the regular Oculus Quest 1. It more felt like it became better, but having it be precise the first time, that was always kind of a struggle. Yeah. Alright, I'll just have to go right to the toilet again, but keep the chat going if you're still interested, and I'll see you very soon. Alright, so here is a shameless promo, by the way. You can get the VR Philosophy t-shirts. They look like this. There's also many other designs, like the thumbnail on this video. If you're interested in that, you can get it at matrice.no/merch. I always like these designs, and yeah, I mean, it's the only way you can get them on a t-shirt, and you can also support the challenge the channel if you like it. But that's the only shameless self promo, at least in terms of those things, that you can get there. Yeah, I would like to. I mean, one of the things that's nice to do a stream is also to get to know some of the people who are watching. So, where are you guys from? And I mean, what do you like to do? What time is it even? I mean, for me it's 21 or 9:40 p.m. In the evening on Sunday here. And as you can see outside, it's still bright. So this is Norway for you. It's raining, it's been hailing, but it's still bright, and it will be bright for probably at least another 2 hours. Then it maybe gets a little bit dark. It would be interesting to hear where you're all from, and yeah. Cheers. I mean, I know Alex is in Arizona, in Phoenix, I think, maybe close to Phoenix. I've always wanted to visit Arizona. It seems like it's kind of similar to California, that you can have a real winter and real summer, like really hot. That seems very interesting. I've been to California once, really liked it. And oh, greetings from Mexico. Oh, that's exciting. Certainly. Never been to Mexico. Central US, mid-afternoon. Yeah, that makes sense. I've only been to California in the United States, and I guess that's the closest I've been to Mexico too. But Mexico would certainly be interesting to experience. I love Mexican food, at least the Mexican food that I've tasted in California. I don't know if that's good or not. You would probably maybe have some different opinion, Manuel, but it was at least a lot better in California than what we get here in Norway. Actually, there is almost like a custom in Norway to eat Mexican food every Friday, so we call it like Taco Friday, and that's quite a Norwegian thing to do, apparently. Not very Norwegian, but yeah, we don't have much culture on our own, so we'll take what we can get. But yeah, we're in Mexico. I think my impression of the United States is it's quite. I mean, I live in Norway. There's like close to 5 million people here, and you visit something like, I mean, okay, San Francisco is quite okay, but then LA, and then you have like, how many live there? Like 12 million or something. It's like 3 times my own. Actually, I should Google that. Los Angeles population. Maybe I'm just making it up. Okay, 4 million. It's the same as my whole country, which is crazy. It's just so many people, and yeah. Also briefly saw New York, but I did have another topic that I would like to introduce you to, which is not so much a question. It's more like an idea that can be extended into VR, which is there's a very interesting philosopher who's named David Chalmers, who has sort of together with another philosopher, Andy Clark, which published a paper under the extended mind, which takes up this very interesting question of where does sort of the world begin around us and where does our minds end, right? Because we usually operate under this dualism between ourselves and the environment around us. But when they ask this question, where our minds stop and where the world begins, where the boundary between this dualism of self and other, to which degree the brain is the mind or the mind is the brain, then they sort of find out that it's really hard to make this separation, because we're already, and we were discussing this earlier, we're already outsourcing certain mind functions to machines, right? Such as recalling phone numbers, and spatial navigation is offloaded to Google Maps. So few would sort of argue against that fact that the technologies are performing important functions for us. But the point that David Chalmers is making is that this can't be reduced to understanding these things as tools. His argument is that these virtual technologies, or the smartphone for instance, and this can be extended into VR, is literally becoming a part of our minds, although they are not wired directly to our brain. So it could be compared with our computers working with information in the cloud. And no, that's not a part of the computer, but it kind of is. I mean, if something is going outside our mind, but it is driving the processes in the brain in the same way. I mean, our brains does not work in a vacuum. It is actively incorporating everything that is around us. So there is no principal difference exactly lying in the skull that is differentiating our mind from the world. So, I mean, if the information structures that we are using for processing is stored in a local hard drive or on the cloud, does that matter? So, if our minds can be extended into the physical worlds, how may be extended into the virtual worlds? And that is sort of a perspective that can be had in imagining the virtual worlds of the future, to view what kind of mind extensions would we actually like to create, or how would we constitute our VR minds there. And an example of that would be the virtual reality memory palaces. So you can read about that there if you like. Oh, Brett is from LA. That's interesting. Oh, that's so awesome. Wow. You should record that. That would be really interesting to see. World scale VR, 200 meters square play space. Damn. Yeah, I think that can be really cool. I mean, so much of our regular VR is just... I mean, it's limited. I have this super small room where I use for my VR. I was planning a video actually with... I thought of making a video where I ran like a 5K in VR around a football field or something like that. Never got around to it. But it's so amazing when you really get the full body motion around you, and oh yeah, that sounds amazing, man. Enjoy. Toe drill. Are you familiar with the psychological idea of affordances? Yes, I am. It's essentially the way your mind interprets the boundaries, objects around you in terms of the possible actions that you can take with them. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I think that's interesting in relation to virtual reality. I have a few master's students now who, some of them have been discussing affordances in their theses, and I think in relation to VR, it's interesting that affordances sort of rely on, it's this term by Gibson, rely on a signifier, right? I mean, in terms of regular physical objects like this glass, I can know what to do with it because it's a physical object and it's in sort of using, I know how regular objects behave, so I can perceive its horizon of what it can do, what it cannot, and the way that I see it is sort of telling me something about it. What's interesting in VR is that normally VR is created in this likening to reality so that we can utilize natural interaction where we don't need to learn how things work. We don't need to learn anything new about how to interact with the virtual objects because we can sort of use the knowledge that we already have from the virtual world. So we tend to maybe create objects that have, to a certain extent, the affordances of regular objects. But then again, the problem with that is it's like in regular games, when you in a certain world you find this thing that you absolutely, given the possibilities of your character and the affordances of the virtual environment, or at least the way that these affordances are signified, then you should be able to jump over that rock, or you should be able to go over that fence, but that's the bounds of the simulation. And I think a lot of breaks in presence in virtual reality is sort of started, or from that every object is, I mean, if you're putting on a VR head mounted display, like my Quest, then you're suddenly immersed in the virtual world, and you can orient in it, you can navigate within it, you can pick up objects and so on. And every object looks like an object, so it looks like it signifies itself as being possible to pick up. But sometimes the bounds of the simulation is changing, and you can no longer do what the signifiers or the affordance gives rise to, and then you get this break of presence, or this terrifying feeling. For instance, if you've played a game where you are, let's say you have this really interesting partner in a quest or whatever, and you learn more about this partner and so on, and it seems like a real person. It affords conversation, it affords getting to know you, but then at a certain point it stops that, but it's still signifying that you can use the same contact with that person. And I think it's an interesting feeling when that sort of stops, when you no longer get that break, because when you're in VR, that's something special. I mean, VR can be so magical when you can, there's an object, I can pick it up. But when you reach the bound of the simulation, the magic is sort of lost, you know. But I'm wondering what you think of affordances. I'm not sure if it would be a psychological idea. I think it's quite related to. Maybe it is a psychological idea, but I think it's quite related to like the extended mind too. It's like, is the affordance a property of your mind, or is it a property of the system, or is it a property of like the synthesis of both? That's definitely a question to be asked there. I only know of affordances a bit because it's used quite a lot in human-computer interaction research, but I haven't actually read Gibson myself. The closest thing, I think he's quite compatible with like Merleau-Ponty and so on, but I don't really know that much. Sensation and perception courses. Yeah. I don't know. I've only heard of it in the human-computer interaction thing. I'm reading this book by Merleau-Ponty now, and I read it once before, but it was in Danish, which is this sort of country quite close to Norway, and I guess we can sort of understand our language quite well, Denmark, but it was terrifying to read. It was just, I don't know. It was just hard. It was so much worse than English. I think I have the book here. Yeah, there it is. Kroppens fænomenologi, which I suppose they would have said. I don't hope there's someone from Denmark here now where I'm. But it is this fantastic book of his sort of way of viewing perception. The book is called The Phenomenology of Perception, and he's trying to sort of avoid the sensory stimulus dualism of that you have a stimulus that's being received by this and they're interpreting that, and really trying to escape that dualism and try to understand how we actually make sense of the world through the bodies around us. It's a great read if you ever need something to relate to VR, because at a certain point, I suppose at about page, let's see here. Yeah, at about page 168, he gets into the talk of like embodiment and like the woman with the feather hat. I can take a quote here. For instance, he is speaking about like keyboards, and if you can come to think about it, the knowledge that you have over your keyboard, if you're trying to imagine that you're not in front of it, for instance, is that like you don't have an objective knowledge of your keyboard. If you're going to write, then it's not because you can picture a keyboard in front of you with everything around you. Like the idea of knowing where to write, if you're writing a sentence really quickly, then it's like you the same kind of point that you can't. Some people can't remember their password unless they're in front of a computer, or unless they're imagining typing it into the computer, because the knowledge is sort of in your hands. And here he's writing, when the typist performs the necessary movements on the typewriter, these movements are governed by an intention, but the intention does not posit the keys at objective locations. It is literally true that the subject who learns to type incorporates the key bank into his bodily space. And this is really relevant for virtual reality and avatars, because we may know and learn skills that are dedicated and realized wholly through the virtual, that may not be ideas that we have, but we learn them, and avatars are also incorporated into our bodily space. That's how we identify with them and act through them. So that, because, for instance, the keyboard is not something that we act on, it's something that we act through, and it's thus a part of on our subjectivity. But yeah, I mean, if you want to read a really great and stimulating book, then read Merleau-Ponty, Phenomenology of Perception. Seaman, hello. Nice that you liked my work. Thank you. You can also join the Discord if you like. I can post that link again now. It would be interesting to talk more. Yeah, Todrill. I've had so many interesting conversations with robotics or HCI people, because one of the 3 credit course I took in S&P, which I guess is what you were mentioning with sensory and perception, sensation and perception. Yeah. That's great. One of the things that is great about HCI and probably robotics too is, of course, exactly that. It's so multidisciplinary. You get to meet so many interesting people, and no one is really. People have their own expert areas, but then, people can collaborate, and it's definitely one of the most fun disciplines, I think, because it's not. Yeah, it can be so playful. It can be so creative in that sense. So I can imagine those are interesting to hear from. So I wonder, do anyone, if you have any advice for other YouTube channels to check out? I mean, I already mentioned Lucas Builds the Future, right? I'll just write that out as the first suggestion. It is worth checking out. He just deserves all the praise he can get, really. I think that's worth saying. I should also mention, I mentioned this in the start, but this is the video that I'm going to work the most on this summer. I'm really excited about it. It's the Next Mind mind reading device. So you plug it into the back of your mind here, and it basically reads that you're focusing, and I want to use this to create like a mind palace. The mind palace, if you haven't watched Sherlock or Hannibal, any of the series, it's basically this idea that you can visualize imagery, like something that you want to recall, at a certain visual or spatial location. And if you see this at this spatial location, I made a video of a mind palace where I remembered like the first, I think it was 50, I should remember maybe 50 or 40 first elements in the periodic table. And it really works. I mean, if you do this, then yeah, here's the video. When you can do this in VR instead of just imagining it, right? The way that it was used. This is like an ancient method. It was used to memorize books, like the whole Bible before you actually could write things down and didn't have to rely on this internal memory aid. But people are using this in memory competitions worldwide today to remember like 60,000 digits of the number pi. And so on, and also if you then can do this in virtual reality, then you don't have to do this imaginary exercise yourself, but you can rather just walk around in these virtual environments and experience it. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you had a mind-controlled mind palace, so that you could just walk around and interact with your mind palace, which is this representation in your mind, using your actual mind to do so. So that is one of the biggest projects that I'm going to keep going. Yeah, but I'm also, I think I'm going to end on that note actually. Going to add the Discord link once again. I'll try to promote that a bit better, but it was fun having this discussion with you guys tonight. Thanks for showing up, asking some questions. I had a good time, and if you want to talk some more, we can do so in the Discord. And yeah, I'll see you around. There's coming a video next week. Peace out.